In the heart of the Roman Republic, one man lit a fire that threatened to consume it all. He wasn't a king or a general. He was a slave, trained to kill for entertainment. With no professional army, no official title, and the entire might of Rome hunting him down, it was like a single ship trying to fight a hurricane. Yet, for 2 bloody years, he brought the Republic to its knees. This is the incredible story of the man who led an army of the enslaved against the legions of Rome, all for the one thing they had been denied: freedom. This is the story of Spartacus. To understand the rebellion, you must understand the world it was born into. The Roman Republic in the 1st century BC was a superpower, and slavery was its engine. This created a brutal cycle. Conquest was fueled by slavery, and the demand for slaves fueled further conquest. Millions of people were torn from their homes and forced into servitude. The absolute worst fate was to be a gladiator, a man forced to fight and die for the amusement of the public. Their lives were short and violent, trapped inside the ludus, a human slaughterhouse with a curriculum of death. Our story begins in one such school in Capua. Here we meet Spartacus. What we know of him comes mostly from the historians Plutarch and Appian, who wrote about him more than a century after he died. They tell us he was a Thracian, and some sources suggest he was once a soldier in the Roman army. In a twist of fate, Rome had sharpened the very knife that would one day be at its own throat. Capua. For reasons lost to history, this soldier became a captive and was sold into the nightmare of the gladiator trade. Inside the school, owned by Lentulus Batiatus, Spartacus was being forged into a killing machine. Life was brutal, but unlike so many others, his spirit wasn't broken by the chains, it was sharpened. A desperate idea began to spread like a fever, a whisper of rebellion that was about to become a roar. In 73 BC, the whispers erupted. Spartacus was part of a plot by about 200 gladiators to escape. The plan was discovered, but it was too late. Facing certain execution, Spartacus and about 70 others made a desperate gamble. They didn't have weapons, they had kitchen utensils, but they overwhelmed their guards and burst onto the streets of Capua. By an incredible stroke of luck, they stumbled upon a wagon full of gladiatorial weapons. Now, properly armed, the small band of rebels fled the city. They chose leaders, 2 Gauls named Crassus and Enemaus, and the Thracian who had engineered it all, Spartacus. Their new base was the forbidding slopes of Mount Vesuvius. For Rome, this was less like a war and more like pest control. They sent a praetor, Gaius Claudius Glaber, with a militia of 3,000 men. Glaber arrogantly blockaded the only path down the volcano, planning to starve them out. It was a fatal mistake. This is where Spartacus first showed the tactical genius that would make him a legend. He had his men gather wild grapevines and weave them into long, sturdy ropes. Under the cover of darkness, the rebels rappelled down a sheer cliff the Romans had left unguarded. They circled around and slammed into the Roman camp from the rear. The surprise was total. Glaber's militia was annihilated, and all their military equipment fell into the hands of the men they had so foolishly underestimated. The spark of rebellion had just become a raging fire. News of the impossible victory on Vesuvius spread like wildfire. Slaves from the surrounding countryside, shepherds, and others cast out by Roman society flocked to join Spartacus. His small band of 70 fugitives swelled into a formidable force of tens of thousands. This was no longer a desperate mob. Spartacus had forged them into an army, a patchwork of different cultures and languages, stitched together by the burning desire for freedom. Rome could no longer afford to be arrogant. The alarmed Senate sent 2 full consular armies in the spring of 72 BC, assuming this would be the end of it. But the slave army had become a shockingly effective fighting machine, likely thanks to Spartacus's past service in the Roman army. At some point, the rebel army split. This division was a weakness Rome could exploit. One group, led by Crassus, was caught and defeated. It was a heavy blow, but it wasn't the end. What happened next cemented Spartacus's reputation. He first attacked and defeated 1 Roman legion. Then, in a brilliant maneuver, he turned his army around and utterly crushed the 2nd Legion as it celebrated its victory over Crassus. In one stunning campaign, a former gladiator had done the unthinkable. Appian tells us Spartacus then held funeral games for Crassus, but with a grim twist, he forced 300 Roman prisoners to fight to the death as gladiators, a brutal and poetic reversal of their own fate. With Rome's best army shattered, the road north was open. Spartacus led his massive army, which some sources claim swelled to 120,000 people, toward the Alps. Historians believe his goal was simple: get his people out of Italy so they could finally return to their homelands. Freedom was literally within sight. And this is where the story takes a baffling turn. For reasons historians still debate, the army did not cross the Alps. Perhaps his followers, intoxicated by victory and rich with plunder, simply refused to leave. Whatever the reason, the army turned around and marched south again. It was a tragic decision. They headed down the Italian peninsula with a new, desperate plan: cross the sea to Sicily. The island had a history of major slave revolts, and Spartacus likely hoped to ignite another one there. He made a deal with Cilician pirates to ferry his army across, but the pirates betrayed him. They took his payment and simply sailed away, leaving the rebel army stranded on the southern tip of Italy. That betrayal sealed their fate. The rebellion was now in its 3rd year, and a panicked Roman Senate turned to one man, Marcus Licinius Crassus. He was the richest man in Rome, ambitious, ruthless, and went to work with brutal efficiency. Given 8 legions, nearly 50,000 soldiers, he chose to restore discipline with the terrifying punishment of decimation, where 1 in 10 soldiers from a cowardly unit was beaten to death by his own comrades. Crassus's message was simple: his men should fear him more than they feared the enemy. Crassus trapped Spartacus's army in the toe of Italy. He built a massive wall and ditch stretching from coast to coast, turning the peninsula into a gigantic cage. Spartacus and his army were now under siege. They managed a heroic breakout on a stormy night, but their situation was desperate. Cracks began to form within the rebel army, with factions breaking away. The end came in 71 BC. With the legions of the famous general Pompey returning from Spain, Spartacus knew he was caught between a hammer and an anvil. Instead of waiting to be hunted down, he chose to risk everything on one last epic battle near the Salaris River. The ancient accounts describe Spartacus fighting on foot, attempting to personally carve a path through the chaos to kill Crassus himself. He fought with unbelievable courage, but was eventually cornered and overwhelmed. All sources agree that Spartacus died in the battle, but in the absolute carnage, his body was never found. He was simply swallowed by the very storm he had created. The war was over, but Crassus's vengeance was not. He wanted to make an example that would be seared into Roman memory. The 6,000 rebels captured alive were sentenced to a horrifying death. They were crucified along the Appian Way, a brutal message for any other slave who might dare to dream of freedom. Though Crassus won the war, his political rival Pompey hunted down a group of 5,000 fleeing rebels and claimed he had ended the war, stealing much of the credit. On the surface, it seemed the rebellion was stamped out completely. Slavery was not abolished, and the Roman Republic continued its march toward becoming an empire. But the story of Spartacus did not end on that battlefield. Though his body was lost and his army destroyed, his story grew into a legend, a powerful symbol of the oppressed fighting back. Roman historians, while viewing him as a dangerous enemy, could not help but admire his courage. He was a man born into slavery, condemned to die for sport, who rose up and challenged the greatest power on earth. He may have lost his war, but he won immortality. His legacy is one of defiant courage, a timeless testament to the human desire to be free. The story of Spartacus raises huge questions about freedom, justice, and how much a person is willing to risk for what they believe in. What do you think you would have done? Crossed the Alps to safety, or turned back to fight? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoy diving into stories of figures who defied the odds and changed history, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We've got plenty more to share. Thanks for watching.